Hi, I'm Renee Hobbs. Welcome to EDC 534, Digital Authorship. We are steaming toward the end of the semester, April 18th. I'm here with the amazing students enrolled in the Graduate Certificate in Digital Literacy at the University of Rhode Island. Online tonight, I see Cornelia, I see Mary, Denise, Meg, and Sherry. So we are really sorry for those of you who are watching the recording not to be involved in the fun, but tonight's topic is kind of really where at the heart of the project-based learning enterprise, you know. We are, in fact, preparing for students to do their final projects. So here I am at the website, EDC Digital Authorship. Just a note, I hope that you have received feedback from me on your Leap 3 stories. Give me a thumbs up if you have received that feedback from me via email. I wanted to talk a little bit about what is probably completely obvious to you now, right? And in a way, we've always known it, but because you're experiencing this course as a learner, you are really acutely sensitive to this idea that all evaluation is an interpretation. That's all. That's all it is. And so I tried to, in my feedback to you, I tried to make really transparent how I was interpreting your work, right? How I was making sense of it and where I was understanding you and where I'm not sure I was understanding you. Trying to give you information about where and how it felt like communication was occurring. But inevitably, my interpretation doesn't actually do much except give you an idea of how one reader, one viewer, one interpreter made sense of it. And so I think, you know, the longer I'm in the education business, the more humble I get about evaluation. And now I really see it as the stance of an active reader, right? You may or may not be able to appreciate my interpretation, but if there are questions, if you have questions as you read back over my crazy notes, I'm happy to engage with you in more dialogue about that. That being said, what a joy it was! What a total joy it was to read these and listen to them. I invite you, if you haven't already, to, it's almost like take time for yourself to get the inspiration from the brilliant people that you are in class with, right? Because it's an actual remarkable constellation of talent here in this metaphorical room. And you guys just did such a great job. I was really blown away by the quality of the work. So it was, thank you for investing yourselves in the digital storytelling project. And now, even more fun, we're on to the final project. So here's what I thought we could do this evening. You know, I'm in so many ways so appreciative of the work of the scholars who have studied project-based learning. I feel like I experience it as a learner and as a teacher, but I'm not particularly a scholar of project-based learning, right? And so I feel like for me, the practice of project-based learning raises, you know, as many questions as it answers, and how you suffer through or struggle through this final project is part of learning about project-based learning. I wanted to talk a little bit about using the scope of work template. Most of you, I think, have managed to find this document, and I see that quite a few of you have already placed your work here under the second tab marked here. So Mary, I see your work is here. So yeah, this is a great easy mechanism for me to take a look at all of your work. I wanted to talk about why the scope of work is such a critical, I wanted to talk about why the scope of work is such a critical feature as a media professional to my own work, and how scopes of work and creative briefs are used in the professional world. Because I found that in education, sometimes those terms are unfamiliar, right? So give me a thumbs up if you had heard of creative brief or scope of work before you took this class. Thumbs up if those were familiar terms to you. Yeah, not generally, because those concepts really come from the world of business, and especially entrepreneurship, and especially media production. So I thought I could talk a little bit about what's the difference between a creative brief and a scope of work, and how are these used in professional media and communication fields. Of course, they're used in many fields of business, in engineering, in the building trades, right? Anytime people are making something for other people, a scope of work, a creative brief, and a scope of work will be involved. But the creative brief is really almost like the first stage of a relationship. So I think of the creative brief and the scope of work as aspects of a relationship, right? Because in the media business, we hire people to execute creative ideas. And we hire people to execute creative ideas, but we hire them to execute our creative ideas, right? Or to enact our goals, to accomplish the objectives of our projects. So the creative brief is like the first stage in the relationship between the creator and, let's say, the client. In this case, I'm the instructor, so I'm kind of like the client, right? I'm the person who has the resources and the I'm the executive producer, as it were. And the creative brief is a way for me to invite you to consider the possibility that you might be involved in my creative project. So if I'm going to build a new website, I will reach out to 5 or 10 of my best website developer friends, and then we'll have a conversation on the phone. And I'll say, here's what I'm thinking about. I need to do this. This is my target audience. I'll blather along. The creative person will take careful notes and then write an email to me. And that email is essentially kind of like a creative brief. They're essentially saying, I heard you. I know what, I think I heard you say that these things were important, right? And I think, based on my interpretation of what you said, I think this is important, or that is important, or maybe this is important. So a creative brief is almost like the beginning of the relationship between the client and the creative producer. For me, when I get an email back like that, sometimes I get back an email like that and the person looks like they're on planet Xenon. And it's like, wait a minute, that doesn't sound like what we talked about at all.
Hey, Renee, could I interrupt and ask a quick question? The feedback you gave on the LEAP 3, would that also be considered a type of creative brief? Or not so much? Is a creative brief more when you're launching a project as opposed to your interpretation of a project already finished?
Exactly.
Okay.
So my interpretation of a project already finished is definitely not a creative brief, right? That's more like a form of feedback or evaluation, right? But a creative brief always happens at the front of a project. And usually when the partners are still, when things are still messy, hazy, when neither one of us knows exactly what we want, or where maybe we're trying to figure out what do we want. So a creative brief is kind of like your best guess at the moment. And it's always understood to be provisional, right? It's not like the creative brief is like signed in blood as a contract. It's almost like I'm demonstrating that I'm aware of the problem that is to be solved through making media, okay? So That's why you shouldn't feel beholden to make a commitment to your creative brief if you change your mind, and you want to do something else. It's okay, because projects change through the creative process. Now, once I've read through the creative briefs, I'm really looking to see, does this look like a person who I can work with? Do they have ideas? Do they bring something to the table? Because a person who writes a creative brief where they just spit back to me what I said, what kind of creative partner is that? Right? That's not somebody who's going to bring much to the creative process. Now, I have encountered and worked with such people, but it's not fun to work with them, right? Because all they want to do is execute your vision. And really the best creative partners bring their own vision into play. So now different people, my guess is different clients might read creative briefs differently, right? But the main goal is establishing this relationship between the client and the creative person. Now I've invited you to go to the next level, which is to submit a scope of work. It's ironic that in the media business and in the manufacturing business and in the building a house business and the architecture business and in lots of other fields, creative people are expected to produce a lot of work for free before they even get the job. This is similar to what a proposal is. A scope of work is very similar to a grant proposal, right? And you can see many parallels, right? In a grant proposal, you tell the funder, here's what I want the money for, right? And you lay out with as much precision as you can how you think, what you're going to do if you get the money. In order for the funder to have a vision and be convinced that you have the capacity to execute the project. So a scope of work is a lot like a grant proposal. But in the creative fields, a scope of work is also a little bit like a contract too. It's also where you're sort of envisioning what you think the project is and demonstrating that you have a clear sense of how to accomplish that project. A scope of work often is the document that generates a contract that results in money. So when I contracted with the web developer to create Mind Over Media, first we had this email creative brief exchange. Then I said, oh yeah, you get it. Then he prepared a scope of work, and it said, Media Education Lab is interested in teaching about propaganda, and they want a crowdsourced gallery, they will blah, 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 blah. And they laid out exactly what they thought they were going to build for me, including, interestingly, as you have had to wrestle with, what could go wrong? Right? And actually, that kind of planning is really a cool process. Now I want to hear from you. Now that you have a sense of how the creative brief and the scope of work is used in the media and communication fields, I am really curious about what was your experience this past week in using that format to think about your final project. What did you like about the scope of work format, and what did you hate about it as you used it as part of your planning project?
I liked it the way it forced me to step through the key components. That is really helpful for me to assemble ideas. So I like that part of it. I got a little unsure about it seemed like there was a duplication as far as the message, like in the executive summary, the creative brief, and the project objectives. And I wasn't sure, is that okay to go basically repeat myself or reconfigure the same message? But overall, it was positive.
Good point about some redundancy there, right? In terms of showing how you are, it's almost like how you're visualizing the end goal in mind. Thank you for sharing that. Other perspectives, what did you like and dislike about the structure, the kind of business-like structure of writing the scope of work?
It helped to clarify what I was doing, narrow things down, structure it. But I kept feeling like I'm doing it wrong. Like she said, it felt like I mustn't be doing this right. But
So
it did help me.
Nervous to use the new format.
Yes.
Yeah, but you did feel like it moved you along in your planning process. Yeah, cool. Other thoughts? What did you like about the scope of work? Mary?
I feel like it helped me to be more thorough in my thinking in the way it was structured, and it was repetitive, but each repetition made me think a little further. So it was good to help refine thinking.
Barbara?
I liked the timetable. I think that it helps to put things kind of in sequence. This has to happen first, this happens to happen next, and then to kind of see where sometimes they all kind of crunch up together and they almost have to happen simultaneously. And I think I like charts and tables. And so when I put it all out on a chart and table, I said, ooh, ah, you know.
What a fascinating observation. I love the way you described that, because we felt that feeling, you know, that it's all going to come down to the end. My own experiences as a person who reviews grant proposals for governments and for foundations, I get a stack of proposals, I've got to decide which ones do I even bother to read carefully, or which ones do I just not even bother to read. I go right to the section on the timetable, because it's like, if you haven't detailed out what you're going to do over time in a granular enough way that looks like a real process, then you probably don't deserve the money, right? And so really that's where the difference between the amateur and the professional, where the level of depth and precision about timetable is super important. The best proposals, the ones that get the highest ratings in federal grant projects, always have the timetable so specific. Who does what, when? Like, and it's just that clear, so that as you read it, you can kind of visualize the whole project. Now, you know, think of what a great act of imagination that is. They just had to make that up, right? Right? It's creative writing, right? In a way, right? Because you kind of have to imagine the thing. But boy, the precision of having to look at a calendar and go, now how long is this going to take? Can I get this done in 3 days? Is this going to take a week? And especially you guys working on a very tight deadline, right? I mean, you don't have much time. So that also forced you to reshape your concept too, right? Like, what's reasonable to do? I hope that happened. I hope that as you worked through the timetable, you went back and like focused more on like not such a grandiose thing. Because you all had some pretty grandiose ideas, and it's okay if it's smaller. It's okay. All right, so the timetable was important. Any other thoughts on scope of work before we move on?
Okay, so I think I did it wrong. Was the timetable for me, what I was doing, or for what I was doing with the kids? Because I did what I was doing with the kids, my lesson plans, how they were laid out, not what I was doing.
Well, now see, from my point of view, that's a very understandable error, Sherry, because that's actually the way, when you start writing curriculum, that's what we do, right?
Right.
That's actually the active writing curriculum is, this is going to be Monday, this is going to be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and so forth. But yes, you're right. You did it wrong. In the scope of work, it's like, what are you, Sherry Jackson, going to do between now and May 7th to write this curriculum? And that's a much shorter, that's a different list, right? So that really does make you think about all of your own processes, right? And I think in a way it makes the project seem more doable, right? When you make that list, you realize, oh, this isn't that hard, right? So even though in my own work, I'll put like writing. Okay, great. Or testing the website, which she seems to go for like months, right? When you say, oh, it'll take 4 days, and it's like, no, it takes 4 weeks, right? So sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's hard to estimate these things. And so that's why it is a work of fiction in a way. Now,
Can I ask one question before we move on? With the example that you just gave, do you purposely at times leave the assignment vague, like within the timetable, the task, or is the goal to do the opposite and be very specific?
You know, that is a great question, Cornelia. You know, when I'm writing a grant proposal and I'm aware of that bias that the reviewer, you know, these are competitive proposals, and who's going to give me $600,000 unless I sound like I know what I'm doing? So when it's a proposal for money, I will often be super precise, even though I know that when I get the money, that may change, right?
Yeah.
So it's almost, I'm not lying. I'm just creating one path it could take, knowing that, you know, there's a lot of moving parts and things could change as we go along. Even the conceptualization of the project is going to change over the 2 years we might take to create it. So I don't ever feel like that I'm bound to do it that way. It's almost like just a mental discipline, like this is one way it could go, right? And so I think I wouldn't want creating a scope of work to interfere with your creative process. You shouldn't feel like it's not a contract, you're not bound to do it that way. It's almost just the discipline of getting a clear sense of how the path is going. And the more experience you have, the easier it is to do that, right? So that's why when you're beginning, the first proposal you ever write is the hardest one, because you never had to write anything out like that before. And then it gets easier and easier once you practice doing it. So my question to you is, could you, under what circumstances, or if any, could you imagine students producing a scope of work? Under what conditions, if any, could you imagine that this format, the genre, could work for students? Pat, and then Jamie.
I feel like science fair projects are a way where they really have to do that. They have to tell you what they're going to do and when they're going to do it sort of in advance.
Great point. Jamie.
I was thinking that senior projects would be a place for this kind of work.
Yeah. I saw a high school history teacher use this scope of work for their National History Day project, right? Because the way in which the kids had to get a kind of clear sense of what could be done during the time period. So obviously almost any project could benefit from something like this. Okay, so any other thoughts on scope of work? Well then, let's talk a little bit about your projects. Let's do this. I asked you to learn a little bit about Pachakacha, right? And so why don't you tell me, what is a Pachakacha, and why will your Pachakacha ultimately have both a persuasive and informative purpose?
It is 20 slides and 20 seconds each. And my interpretation to answer that question is that there's a visual component, and so that's informative and can be persuasive, and it's married with a narrative that, based on the time constraints, just supports engagement and persuasion and informing.
Nicely put. Other thoughts on this? Why is the Pachakacha both informative and persuasive? Especially, we should consider it for your project in relation to the sequence, where is it, of work that you're going to do. There's the architecture, right? Here's where we are now. In just 2 weeks, you are going to submit this finished Pachakacha. And then a week after that, the final work. In what sense, according to this timetable, might your Pachakacha be both informative and persuasive? Jamie?
I'm wondering, is it persuasive because you're going to encourage people to look at your final work? It's a little bit like a trailer.
You got it. Exactly the way you should think about it. In a way, you're teasing, right? Maybe you will have so developed your project that you will have it all thought out and ready to go. But chances are, by April 30th, this is still going to be more like a planning document. You won't have made the whole movie, right? But you'll be able to have the outline of what the main ideas of the movie are going to be, right? So you will be encouraging us to taste the whole work coming up, but you won't really have finished it yet. That's why many of my students have told me that the Pachakacha is another fine tool for planning, right? That's one thing the Pachakacha guy said. A Pachakacha is all about organization. And so what goes first, and then what goes, and how does this thing unfold? Well, your final project is going to have to unfold in some way. And the Pachakacha gives you a chance to try that out, right? To try out the organization of telling the story of your project, right? So in some ways, all the project-based learning intermediate deliverables, we call them, are tools for your planning and your thinking, right? And one thing the project-based learning folks tell us is that we have to scaffold students to be independent if they're working in a project-based learning team. We have to provide structures that allow them to develop the ideas. We can't be giving them a checklist and saying, you know, do this, do all their thinking for them. Do this, do this, do this, do this. If we do that, then they never learn how to do that, right? So they have to, you learners have to struggle with that. But this allows a structure for like increasing the detail and the specificity as your project develops, recognizing that in the beginning it's really messy. And even now, right? What you think you're doing now, and by May 7th, there's going to be some shift, right? It's okay. But this is just a way to like manage the mess, right? So I think that is a really good way to think about it. Barbara.
I noticed that the date is April 30th. It's a Monday. Is that we're kind of Wednesday to Wednesday, but
Yeah.
no.
Yeah. So
It's not 2 weeks. It's 12 days. Just pointing out.
good point. You're right. Truthfully, and I'll give you that if it came to me by Wednesday, it would be okay. I'll be looking for it by Wednesday. Okay, so maybe I'll change that date. I don't know. It's a good point. It should be. You're right. I should go Wednesday to Wednesday. Now that you're saying that, just for consistency's sake.
Every day counts.
Every day counts. Good point. So I'll change the date so that it's Wednesday to Wednesday. That'll make it a true 14-day period. Realize next week is our last, our last Zoom meeting.
Yeah.
Right? So what's going to happen is let me just go back and look at that share screen again. Where is it? On April, I guess it will be May. What will it be, Barbara? May
May 9th.
May 1. On May 1, I'll change that date to May 1. And
Oh, so you want to change April to May 2nd, right? Right?
exactly.
May
So
2nd.
Correct. So this will change to May 2nd.
What about the last one?
Well, the last one can't change too much because I have to get the grades in.
Oh,
The university presses on me there. I
fine.
don't have the same flexibility there,
We'll
but
let it slide.
I will make that change to May 2nd. So what's going to happen is on May 2nd, you're going to get a note from me saying, here are all the pachakachas. I'll put them all up on the website, right? And so you'll get to see them and I'll invite you to watch and comment on each other's because, you know, the spirit of everyone learns from everyone, right? So it will be nice to have them all in one place to look at. And obviously then that will whet our appetite for the final work that will get posted. Okay, so let's see now. Okay. So Mary, I wanted to pick on you a little bit because I thought your creative brief was amazing. And one of the things I thought would be useful for if you could do for us is talk to me a little bit about how did you construct this? And what do you remember? This was like a long time ago now, right? But what did you remember about your process as you composed this?
Well, what I really did was systematically try to answer the questions. And I found the questions in the Create to Learn book. And as I went through each question, I thought carefully about what that would mean for the project and then just wrote it out. And tried to understand the separate questions, what they were aiming for. So realizing that they were looking at different aspects of the potential project.
Really nice. The one that almost everybody struggled with was question 6.
Mm-hmm.
How will it be remembered and retold? And so I want to talk a little bit about this question because, again, the theme of this session, this planning conversation, is this idea that it almost returns us to stuff we were talking about in the first week of class when we talked about the creative process. Do you remember when we started this class? We thought about the creative process. We understood creativity to be something that everyone could do, and that we understood that it was a work of imagination, right? So one of the things I love about this question is that this question really invites us to think about what value does the work have? And how will it be understood by not you, by others, right? By someone beyond yourself. How could it possibly have value for others? And one of the reasons why we like to include that in a creative brief is that, and this is, I think, maybe the bias of the discipline of communication, right? Is that communication people are always thinking about the audience. We're always thinking about, well, how will the reader, the user, the viewer, how will they have value? After they've read it or used it or watched it, like, how will they talk about it to others? You know, what will they get as the essence? And so that's an act of imagination for you, to imagine how someone will stumble across your blog page where you have your final project and read your work and go, whoa, or or how will it have value? So how will it be remembered and retold? It's kind of a little obscure, but what we mean by that really is what people will remember and why it will be meaningful to them. And this also then is a really good thing when we're just beginning the creative process, because it also helps us think about head, heart, and spirit, right? That we have to connect, we want to connect, you know, cognitively, you know, socially and emotionally, right? And we want the work to have a larger value. So I thought this was a really good example of how the structure can actually empower thinking. But then take a look at how nicely the projects all work out. And so I thought we have just a little bit of time for this, but notice how cool, how so like magical how this happens. Each of you had your own project based on your own context and your own situation, but notice how elegantly they fit together, almost as if you had planned it. I mean it. Cornelia is writing an academic paper exploring the digital identity of teachers and its impact on learners and colleagues. And Meg is writing an academic paper on esports in relation to digital identity and digital authorship. So both of you, in different contexts, are interested in this issue of identity. Like, wow, how totally cool, right? Meg, you're tackling a genre that is very unknown by many teachers and might be a new way of thinking about the nature of performance, right? In terms of performing a competitive game in a esports way. So I feel like in some ways, you're going to be like a translator to translate this, to consider how teachers might find it valuable, right? So I feel like that is really cool. And Cornelia, you're also kind of translating, right? Thinking about teachers who might not have a very well-defined digital identity, and then those who feel very confident about their digital identity. Now notice how the creative projects fit together. Erica is doing a podcast about new immigrants in her middle school context. And Adam is writing an essay on popularity in a digital age, thinking a little bit about the social nature. So they're both addressing this intensely social context of digital literacy. Who is more concerned about social issues than middle school students? Nobody. And what about the social pressures and the social tensions and conflicts and paradoxes that young new immigrants experience as they move from one social context to another? So both of these creative projects are dealing with the social context of digital expression and communication. Now look at the way the elementary projects fit together. It's so cool. Barbara's doing a curriculum on digital authorship for grades K through 5 in her library class. Jamie's creating a digital teacher's guide for using Seesaw portfolios, which is a really cool way where kids post their work online to share with the families. Angie's doing a StoryCorps project with her elementary students where they're focusing on stories about their community. And Denise is doing a video PSA with her students to promote the Pennies for Patients project, the social action project. Like, I look at those all four together and I go, that is a really nice, that's a nice pod of projects, I think.
Mine is missing, Renee. I'm doing an elementary as well.
Oh, can you tell me more about it, Sherry? And I will put it up here.
Mine is I'm developing a curriculum for poetry through digital storytelling.
Poetry. Oh yeah, that's right. Since I typed this up, I did get your piece. So I'm going to make sure I include that in on this page when we're done with the class. Take a look at the middle school and high school projects, the two Matts, right? How weird. Matt Mendez, Matt Pava. Matt Mendez is doing a digital literacy course for grades 5 through 8. He's going to use Google Classroom and scope out what this course is going to look like. And Matt P is designing a vlog assignment for his older high school students, where the kids are going to share their insights on their academic careers in a way that kind of gives advice to the younger ones. So in both cases, we have a curriculum design project that has a kind of a strong either technology focus or a multimedia focus. And then how about the university adult learner projects? Tim's writing an academic research paper assignment for his undergraduate community college students on analyzing different types of social media. Mary's doing a unit on digital authorship for her undergraduate course in media and society. Pat's doing an online mini course for K-12 teachers, introducing them to social media and education. So 2 projects with undergrads and one project for teachers. So I feel like one of the things I continue to discover about project-based learning is that I don't have to overstructure choice, right? You guys all made choices that fit really beautifully within the paradigm of what we've been learning this semester, right? And I think the projects seem to have high relevance and usability for you. Here's what I wanted to know, though. At this point, we have just a few minutes left. Oh, and I better plug in my computer pretty soon too. How will this project advance your leadership competencies? In what ways will this project support? We're claiming that the certificate in digital literacy is a leadership program. How does this project that you're doing potentially support your leadership in digital literacy? Barbara and Denise.
Well, I have already applied to my superintendent for an additional day. I work 4 days a week now. And by presenting what I've been learning and that we have a need for this, this is where we need to be going. And I've been learning about this. So the curriculum, I did a professional development from a project from last semester, and the curriculum I'm working on, I plan to implement. I'd like to implement it on my 5th day, but so it's very practical. I'm really hoping that, taking these steps, I can make a difference in the school community, whether or not I get an extra day or not, but, to add to what the teachers are doing by modeling it myself.
Nice.
Just to add to that too, I think also that as we do this digital authorship stuff in our schools, teachers will see it, students will see it, and they'll want to produce more and more, and teachers will be coming to us asking us for help and asking us those difficult questions, and we'll have the answers, and we'll have worked with it and be able to help them.
Yeah, because once you've done it yourself, you have you can support someone else who's going to try it for the first time. Great point. In what other ways is the project that you're working on advancing your leadership? Mary?
Through my project, it's course design, and so that might be picked up and tried by other instructors.
Because you're working in a situation where several people are teaching that course, but maybe your new approach can influence a whole team of people.
And be adapted and adopted and repurposed and added to, etc. Yeah.
That's a nice thing. Jamie?
I see a couple of ways that I'll be able to help impact the learning of other professionals. As department chair of the library department, I will be bringing different ideas back to the department and asking them to kind of implement it in different levels. And also in my school, I push into the classroom and work with my colleagues. And I've set up a digital literacy team, and we meet once every 6 weeks. And I'm not an expert by any means, but just start the conversations. And I'm trying to synthesize what I'm learning with what I'm hearing from my colleagues so that I can create things that are meaningful for their practice, not just mine.
No, that's beautiful. So all boats are rising, right? With that approach. Cool. Other thoughts on how your work on this project might advance your leadership in digital literacy? Meg?
My topic actually came from a conversation with two colleagues who are classroom teachers, and one in the Computer Science Academy and one who runs an e-league or esports league. And so my topic in this project is a reaction of concerns of theirs and questions that they brought to our conversation. So I'm feeling like I'm able to collaborate and empower their ideas and their thoughts. And after I'm doing an academic paper, but then I'm going to work with both of these individuals to submit conference presentation proposals to combine what I find with their practice in the classroom.
How cool. So in a way, this is a part of this is a knowledge community or a learning community that you have with these folks. And you're making a contribution that will advance the quality of thinking in that community and spread out through conference presentations to a much larger community. Neat. So I do invite you to think a little bit about the way in which, it's almost like, I hate to say this, but I kind of want you to write, even now, before you even take a step further on this project, I want you to think a little bit about how you will describe this project on your resume or your CV. Like, what will it, like, because that's kind of the point, right? That's what this is. This is building your expertise. And so thinking about it that way as like, how does this, what will I be able to claim as my expertise, right? And almost like, write the line on your resume, right? And think about that, because I think that also helps us kind of, especially now when it gets crunchy and we're all busy, and now you guys are making so many sacrifices to be in grad school while you're trying to have a career and a life and a family, and you're going, what the hell am I doing this for? Well, the long-term benefit is you're advancing your expertise in ways that will have value, unpredictable and beautiful value way down the road. So just keep that in mind as you get through the hard part now, right? The hard part, which is now. All right, so I think I only have, because I knew that this was the week where we'd be kind of in the process, right? I love this image for its significance for like what you're doing now, right? You're looking through the frame of the assignment, in this case, the camera lens, and the frame device is like, this is what Hobbs wants me to make in order for me to get an A, right? That's the assignment specifications. But through that, what can you imagine, right? And so that's really this process of planning and developing. If you are interested, one last thing. In the scope of work, there's that part about what could go wrong. How come that's so important? How come that is actually another criteria that I would use if I was reading a proposal to decide whether or not it should be funded? How come thinking about what could go wrong or what the limitations of the project are, how come that's so important?
I think it's important because you're thinking about all the things that can happen, but also it sort of shows that that things go wrong. Like, you're not saying this is perfect, this is awesome, this is, hey, guess what? I teach middle school. Something's going to go wrong.
Yes, it's exactly right. It's almost like you demonstrate that you understand the the unpredictability of the universe, right? Yeah, good. Denise.
Knowing that something's going to go wrong too, you could have a backup plan of what you're going to do next, just in case this happens. I'm going to do this instead.
And I can guarantee, based on my experience teaching this class, that some of you will need to use a backup plan, right? It happens. So Cornelia, how come this issue of reflecting on limitations now at this stage is important? Why does it matter?
I'm thinking that it ties in with the business world where risk is an important line item. And if you're not including that and acknowledging that, there's a big hole. Because that's to be expected, not something to be surprised about when it happens.
Yeah, it's a great observation that we learned so much from that. Barbara.
Just like when a researcher, finishes a research project, at the end, there's always further wonderings, and maybe this would lead to further research. And I felt like those constraints kind of said, okay, given what I can do now, this is maybe the best, but if I learn more, I can do more. And so it was kind of like an open window of where to go next to improve what I'm doing.
Yeah, it's a sign of maturity too, really, is to be able to understand, look, I'm not going to be able to eat the whole elephant all in one bite, right? This is a process, right? To be aware of that. One of the things that I feel in my own experience supervising students who make media as a learning experience is that some of my students will fail. And actually, one of the things I like to say early in the process, like about now, right? None of you expect to fail. None of you are going to fail, but you might. And so I think it's okay to tell students, you're taking a risk to do this project. You're using your imagination to try to imagine what you can do in the next 3 weeks to get this thing done. And it might not, and you can imagine all you want, but reality might not, what you can create might not match what you can imagine, or other things could go wrong. And so I often will point out how in life we tend to learn more from failure. And so that if failure happens in this context with your EDC 534, you will have a very significant learning experience. Right? And I think reflecting on in my own life, how I have learned more from failure than from success is something that allows me to encourage you guys to take risks with this project. And in a way, if taking risks with this project increases its possibility of failure, like that's actually okay, because that increases the likelihood that you're going to have a bigger learning experience. Because what I really care about is the quality of your learning experience, not the quality of this final project. Like, that's what I really care about, is what your learning experience is. So, and one of the things that school provides is a safe place to take risks, to test your competencies and to stretch, right? So you don't have to play it safe with this project. You can stretch out into something ambitious and maybe not quite meet the target, right? And know that I'll be a sensitive reader around that, because I bet you noticed, did you notice that there's no criteria for evaluation for this final project? I wonder why. Okay, we'll talk about that next week, all right? I want you to think about that. How come? All the other projects, all the other LEAPs had very clear criteria for evaluation, didn't they? But not this one. So let's think more about that for next week. If you want to, but this is absolutely optional, because I know what you're really working on is your project. But maybe this conversation tonight inspired you to want to learn more about project-based learning. So I've put two wonderful readings. 20 tips for managing project-based learning, which are really helpful for doing digital authorship with kids. A wonderful set of principles from the Buck Institute for Education, the pioneers in project-based learning, called Managing Project-Based Learning, Principles from the Field. And then because you guys were so excited about the copyright thing, my former student and dear colleague David Cooper Moore and John Landis, another of my former students, just published this wonderful, wonderful chapter in my new book. Their essay is called "I Got It from Google, Recontextualizing Authorship to Strengthen Fair Use Reasoning in the Elementary Grades." So maybe you'll want to put that on your to-read list. In any case, I'll see you guys on, is that really true? Oh, so for next week, all I want you to do, this is your only assignment, you're working on your project, but talk to a class member about the project, okay? So you can do that through text or through email or through Facebook or whatever means you want, but reach out to somebody and ask them some questions about what they're working on, okay? All right. Any other questions before I let you go? Okay, you guys are working hard. Good luck. I'll see you guys next week. I'll stay online if you want to have a private conversation. I'll just kind of hang out here for a while. Otherwise, I'll see you next week, okay? Bye-bye.
Renee?
Yeah.
My project is digital inquiry, not digital authorship.
Mm-hmm.
Is that reasonable?
Remind me, Barbara, what are you going to do?
Well, I'm writing a curriculum to teach digital inquiry research to the fifth grade level at this point, rather than digital authorship,
Okay.
which is what I was thinking.
Right. So this means that you're going to support students as they move through a process of wondering, discovering, interpreting. They're going to be reading texts.
They're going to learn to come up with a question, how to locate information, how to synthesize information, how to communicate information.
How to communicate information. Tell me more about that.
Well, that's the final project. How do they communicate it? I don't have all of this figured out yet.
Sure.
I want them to be able to communicate with each other the contents of what they learn.
Right.
But there's also pieces of communication throughout where as they're learning some of these things, they're sharing them in the context of their classroom so that they're learning from each other as they're learning how to evaluate websites and put together ideas and triangulate ideas. As far as how they actually present their project, I am not 100% sure whether I want to give them options or, these are fifth graders, so they're limited.
So I would respond by saying that, Julie and I came together because we saw the connection between reading and writing, right? And that's really what the sequence has been, right? Julie's class in the fall looking at reading, my class in the spring looking at, writing, making, creating. It seems like if your curriculum didn't have any student making or creating, then that probably would not meet the assignment here. Because remember, the point of this assignment is to be able to use what you learned in this course. But it seems like an inquiry-based project could involve simple, one classroom length creative projects where students synthesized, summarized, interpret text, and create something in digital form, right? This semester, we've learned how kids' oral presentation skills can be developed with Flipgrid, right? That could be, that's digital authorship, right? We've thought about making PowerPoints or annotating articles, right? So I think as long as I see evidence that you are sensitive to the fact that the model, the inquiry model, requires that students create something to demonstrate their understanding, and that you've figured out a way to get kids to do that, then it'll be cool.
Okay. Well, I may need to revise. or at least refocus that 5th lesson, which is on the communicating.
Yeah.
To make sure that it is big enough or open enough, or so that it takes in these concepts from this.
It seems like one way to handle that. So let's say the 5th lesson is where they communicate something. If in lesson 1 there's a little bit of creation, I mean, again, you have only a small amount of time, right? But still, if at each set, let's say the first one is what are your keywords? Well, there's a writing project. That's authorship right there, right? So maybe if each of the lessons has a tiny bit of communication, then it will essentially, they will be building to the final thing. The final thing might be, you've got your keywords, you've got your summary, you've got your citation, you've got your interpretation, and now you put it all together in some way. Right?
All right.
You'll figure it out. Good luck.
Oh, thank you very much for taking the extra time with me.
My pleasure. Ping me if you need me. Otherwise, I'll see you next week.
All right. Thank you very much.
Oh, and Barbara, you rock so much. You rocked my world tonight with the cake thing. I printed out the screenshot of the recipe to show to Randy. You were so right. That was just like the best story ever. And thank you for doing it. It was like beyond my expectations.
It's pretty good cake too.
I'll let you know.
All right. Thank you, Renee.
See you.
Good night.